Welcome to the Hip Replacement Podcast. I'm Chris Bystriansky, your host. I'm a two-time hip replacement patient, one about 10 years ago and the other about 12 years ago, and I'm here to share my experiences with you. And in this episode, I'm going to talk about making your comeback. All right, we are the authors of our lives. We are the authors of our story. And what is it that we can do after hip replacement surgery to really take our lives back and give us that opposing feeling or that opposing life event? The hip replacement surgery on one end, and then what is it that we can do to really be the opposite of that hip replacement surgery? Okay, how do we take our lives back and how do we rewrite our story so that the hip replacement is well in our past and we are the authors of this great epic life story? You know, one way to look at it is we all go through ups and downs. And with this hip replacement surgery, the pendulum might be swung way to one side and it may feel like it's never going to end, or this is a terrible experience. How am I going to get my life back? Well, we have the opportunity to force that pendulum to swing completely to the other side. All right. To be on the good side, to have great experiences, to leave an impact. And how do we do that? And what are we even talking about here? Making a comeback, writing your story could be any positive life event. And honestly, it could be something that you were not going to do except for the hip replacement surgery. In my mind, because it's happened to me, I'm a better person because of the hip replacement surgery. And what I mean by that is I've gone out and I've done more because of the hip replacement surgery than I would have done if I did not have the hip replacement surgery. I was very complacent. I had a very comfortable life. And the hip replacement gave me a sense of almost urgency to go and do things. So I really used the hip replacement as a catalyst to make my life better than it would have been without it. Not only did I reclaim my life, which is what I want for you, but I also suggest to you that you're able to create something better than you would have had without the hip replacement surgery. And let me give you an example. After my hip replacement surgeries, years down the road, I went and I did a couple Ironman triathlons. And if you're not familiar with Ironman triathlons, they're pretty grueling physical events. In one day, you do 3 events. There is a 2.4 mile swim, a 112 mile bike ride, and a full marathon, 26.2 miles after that, all in one day, kind of crammed together. And before the hip replacement surgery, I thought that was absolutely insane. Why in the world would anyone do that? All right. But following the hip replacement surgery years after, I started to look at it and break it down. And it just didn't seem like it was that difficult because I did the math and I realized that, this is possible for me. I can do all of these different events. And I got sick and tired of people looking down on me because I had a hip replacement surgery. They would say things like, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. What are you going to do?" Well, eventually I just decided I was going to go do an Ironman triathlon to, number one, shut these people up. And number two, to give life, or whatever forces made me to have this hip replacement surgery, to give those things the big fat middle finger and to signify that I'm back. I'm reclaiming my life, hip replacement surgery or not. Now, that was part of my comeback. That was part of my comeback story, to go from not being able to walk across a room to crossing the finish line of an Ironman triathlon. Certainly that was a huge accomplishment, but there were steps along the way. I didn't go from the operating table to an Ironman triathlon. That was years later, and there were many points along the way, from getting back on the bike to going for walks to just doing something athletic to putting in the time and the work to do that. And the Ironman was not the end all be all for me. It was the fact that I was able to do that. And number two, having the drive, the ambition to do that. Whereas before the surgery, I did not have that at all. So, I talk about an Ironman and as part of my comeback story, but it doesn't have to be something like that. That was significant for me because it just fit my personality, but it could be anything. I mean, imagine your comeback story being you started gardening again. You started doing yoga again. You took that big vacation that you didn't know you'd ever be able to go back on. You watched your grandkids. You watched your kids more. You did something. You coached something. You did something that you did not think was possible or was not even in your mind because you had to go through the hip replacement surgery. All right. So if the hip replacement surgery is relatively low on your to-do list, on your life goals, it's kind of a down point in your life, your comeback story is something significant, something that you will be proud of. And it's something different for everybody. Like I said, it could be participating in an event, yoga, gardening, doing something, anything that's important to you. Maybe you want to reach back out to people, establish relationships again, anything that lets you re-engage with your life and puts you in a better position than you were before the hip replacement surgery. And it's completely different for everybody. And I'm still on this journey myself. The story doesn't end. My story doesn't end with the Ironman triathlons. I'm working on being consistent, exercising more, getting in the best physical shape that I can possibly be in following the hip replacement surgery. And it's been years. It's just a work in progress. And I feel that the hip replacement has given me more of motivation to do those things than I did before. So, how do we even start writing our comeback story? It's important to realize that the comeback story is getting knocked down and then getting back up, falling off the horse, falling off the bike, and getting back on and getting back to riding, to living our lives. So how do we do that? And what were the steps that I took? Well, number one, I think it's important to realize that we have to move past the hip replacement surgery, and we have to do that actively. I have some friends who had their hips replaced, and unfortunately they sit around on the chair or on the couch and watch TV, and then they complain about the hips. They're in pain. They can't do this. They can't do that. But it looks like they're not even putting any effort in to take care of themselves, to do some workouts, to do physical therapy, to do the things, the stretching, the things that will help them. So I think it's important to realize that we have the ability to help ourselves, to rewrite the story and to get to where we want to be with our hips and with our lives and with our bodies. So the first thing is to, move past the hip replacement surgery. Not live in it, not live in that past, in that epic event that did happen to us, but then really take control, take responsibility for getting better. All right. So responsibility and being active and active participant in our recovery. Now, number two, really identifying what's important. And important is different for everybody. It took me some time to really identify that I wanted to go do an Ironman. But my first priority was go for a walk. Go for a simple walk. That was the priority. And then over time, it got to be bigger and bigger and bigger, eventually to an Ironman. But what's important to you? Is it that vacation you've been waiting to take your whole life? Is it getting back to yoga or exercising or golfing or being healthier, doing something to really feel like you're going in the right direction. So think about what is important to you, because if it's not important, it's going to be very difficult to put into work, to be motivated to do the things, and then there might not be a sense of accomplishment once it's done. So identify what's important. The third thing, start small. All right, if you want to go run that marathon, if you want to do that walk, that hike, that bike ride, that yoga class, the yoga seminar, you want to get back to whatever it is, more gardening, more intimate time with that special someone, start small and build up over time. The consistency and just being active, even at a small level, helps you get to that next level. You know, we have to take our first step before we can take our second, third, fourth, and 10th or 20th step. So take that first step, start small. Fourth thing, be consistent. There's nothing that breeds confidence like being consistent in what we are doing, whether that's exercising or establishing relationships, communicating, whatever it is, whatever you're working towards, just be consistent at it. Even if you're not any good at it to begin with. You know, I do yoga. I'm terrible at it. It doesn't even look like yoga. It looks like, I don't know, a big bear trying to do gymnastics. It is not pretty. I'm not very good at it, but it helps me. So, and I'm certainly better at it than I was 20 years ago. But it is just being consistent and getting out there and doing something. And then fifth, it's take that action. Go out there and get it. And once you achieve something small, go to something bigger and bigger and bigger until you are back to where you want to be. So if you want to do a marathon, for example, start small. 5K, a walk, a run, or what have you. If you want to do yoga, if you want to be more intimate, start small. If you want to get back into the dating world or meet more people, start small and go and get it. All right. There's a lot of things that we can do that will help us rewrite our story, to correct the course, to help us force the pendulum to swing from a negative point in our lives to something much more positive that we have some control over. So there's a lot of things that we can do. Being here, listening and watching this podcast are a part of that. I'm here to help you move forward and really reclaim the life that you want. So maybe this is part of your comeback story. It's part of my comeback story, sharing what I've learned and helping other people. But again, this looks different for everybody. You know, we had this hip replacement surgery, and it doesn't have to define us. It doesn't have to be who we are. When I was still working in the corporate world, I was referred to the guy who had his hips replaced until I was referred to the guy who did those 2 Ironmans. Those are 2 completely different people. So I evolved from being identified as a hip replacement patient to being identified as an Ironman triathlete. And that was a wonderful feeling. And that certainly was part of my story, part of my comeback. And you can do exactly the same thing, doing whatever it is that is important to you and that gives you the confidence to live your life to the fullest extent possible. That gives you the most happiness, the most confidence. All right. So I hope this is helpful in you reclaiming the life and helping you rewrite your story with a big comeback success. Thank you so much for tuning into the Hip Replacement Podcast. And until next time, I wish you the best recovery possible. Take care.